Lord, would you give us a few minutes sitting with you at your feet? Give us yourself. Bless you, Lord. Amen. So friends, this summer we're with the minor prophets. And we've noted every week that minor does not mean lesser. It just means shorter. They're pretty good books. They're great prophetic books to get into because being shorter, you get your head on it. They pack a punch. Today we're with Micah. Now, Micah is a contemporary of Isaiah, and the exile hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. For Micah, for Isaiah, for the prophet who can see through all the shields and things, and they can see what's really going on. They see it's on the horizon. So Micah, like the rest of them, he's straight on it. He names it. He puts it in front of them, and he alternates that then with passages of hope, where God is still with them, and he's still working, and ultimately he'll work things out. But he pushes them hard to remember who they are and to reorder their lives in the way that God had wanted them to order their life together. One of the things that Micah is particularly upset about is that they've begun selling off their lands. They're entering into partnerships with other nations. They're selling their land. And this is bad, particularly bad news, because when God brought them into the promised land, he had said to them, order your lives in these ways, and if you do, the land will be fruitful. It'll be a land of flowing with milk and honey, and if you do, the people will thrive, and there'll be no poor among you. But they would never do it. God's ways are always scary to us. And so they chose other ways, and they looked around at all the people around them and these big, powerful nations and these empires, and they kept wanting to order their lives in the way of empire instead of the way of the kingdom of God. Regarding the land in particular, God had said every family should have land, and because they'll have land, and then because of Jubilee, every 7 of 7s, every 50 years, basically, you forgive all debts, no matter what. No matter how you got into them, no matter what it takes, you just start over. It's a reset button. That meant that no one got too far ahead, ultimately, and no one got left, ultimately, behind. Everyone had the possibility of some security, of participating, of being in the fabric. When you start selling the land off, you're more or less permanently undoing that possibility. Now, Jubilee is a pretty radical way of economics. God's way of doing things takes faith. It takes a lot of faith to do economics that way. But when Micah sees them selling the land is when he kind of freaks out, we would say. He's like, if you do this, we will never get back to straight. Because it won't be possible. You will have undone things at a level that we can't do anything about. So he begins to then say, let's get it out. Let's get it out on the table. Chapter 6, he calls essentially for a covenant trial. And he says, hear what the Lord says. Rise, plead your case before the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Why? Because the Lord had said, the land is mine. I'm giving it to you, but it's ultimately still mine. I give it to you in covenant trust. And the Lord even enters into covenant with the land. Not just with the people, but with the land. It's very clear. We don't talk enough about this, so people are like, ooh, that's radical. That's a verbatim. The land is mine, says the Lord. I have entered into covenant with the land. These are just Old Testament verbatims. So yeah, it's different, but that's what it is. So when Micah calls for a covenant trial, the witnesses of the other side are the mountains because they've been there. They've seen what y'all have been doing. It's the hills. They've been there forever. And you newcomers are behaving like you're so everything and all that. We've always been here, we hills. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how things work here, so stop it. So Micah calls on the hills and the mountains to be the covenant witnesses on God's behalf. This kind of thing happens all over the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament. And Micah then says to them, you've lost the plot. Remember the great things God did for you? Remember how he brought you up out of Egypt? You know, all the prophets, the God who brought you up out of Egypt, who cared for you, who gave you a future and a hope. And he says, you've lost the plot. God has done so much for you, and you've given up on it. You've lost the story. So then Micah, after naming it, saying, it's really bad, let's have a trial so we can get this clear, and saying, you've lost the plot, then he begins to say, what would it take then? What would it take to restore relationship that has been so deeply broken? How do you do something deep enough to actually really reset this relationship? With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? The hills have been here forever. You've been here for generations. God had a plan for this to work out for all time. So we're going to bring a calf a year old? Feels a little chintzy, right? A little thin. Things only been alive for a year. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or 10,000 rivers of oil? Well, how much is even that compared to the depth of what's gone wrong? So then a qualitative jump. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression? The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. If I go that far, can we reset? Provocative, isn't it? And then he pauses, Micah. He gives a rhetorical pause. He doesn't answer that. He lets that sit. And then he turns to the beautiful, justly famous summary of what it is that God has wanted from these creatures called humans that he made, what it is that makes a whole life. What is it that God, in small summary, has said makes a full, good human life? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. When you hear it in summary, it's not so much, is it? It's just goodness. It's just simple right living in reality. Let's break it down a little bit. Let's just ask, what does Micah mean by justice? What does Micah mean by kindness? And what does walk humbly with your God mean? Super quick. I think for Micah and for the prophets, justice means treating everything and everyone according to its gifted being. All life is gift from God, including human life. All life is gift from God. So it's other people, treat them as equally gifted with life as I am, but it's also the mountains and the hills and the seas and everything. It's all gifted with being by God. So I treat everything according to its gifted being. I understand my own life as being gifted. And yes, this is an attitude, but in God's economics, this attitude begins to work in systems. No one gets too far ahead because we're all gifted with life. We're at the same level. No one gets too far behind because we're all gifted with life. We're all at the same level. Walk justly. Love, mercy, or kindness. I didn't know this. I did my homework. I looked this up. This word is hesed. This is the incredible love of God in the Old Testament. This is the big word for God's never-ending, never-failing love in the Old Testament. This is, if you will, the most, pre-gospel word there is in the Old Testament, the unconditional, undeserved love of God. It actually feels like kindness and mercy is too mild a word to translate it as. I don't know how that decision got made. My Hebrew is not that great, but this is hesed. It's a big deal. It's also a natural next step from if my being in life is gifted and your being in life is gifted, and if all things that are made's being is gifted, walk with the love that has gifted the life. These things flow together. They work together nicely. And then this lovely one. Walk is a verb. It's about mundane stuff. Just walk, your life. Spend your life. Take your time. Do the things you have to do. Humbly with your God. This is implicitly the same promise Jesus makes at the end of Matthew's gospel. I will be with you always. God says, I will be with you. He says to them, I carried you on the Exodus the way a father will carry his child. I carried you in your difficulties. God promises to be with us, and he simply asks that we humbly, gratefully, acknowledging the giftedness of all things, walk with him. Walk humbly with our God. There's the place where I was an undergrad, there's an Anglican whose name I want to bring before us. I just want to plant this name because we don't lose it. We're reaching this point in time where we're beginning to lose contact with some wonderful saints. C.S. Lewis doesn't get as much attention as he used to get. Chesterton doesn't get as much attention as he used to get. Corrie ten Boom, you can find Corrie ten Boom's talks online. Go Google around for them. They're fantastic. But there's some of these wonderful figures, towering figures of faith that we're beginning to lose touch with a little bit. One of them who's particularly relevant for us is a pastor priest named John Stott. Now, I had all this in my introduction, but given that the air is not on in here, I trimmed all that down. So give me a minute to stumble around and just set the moment. So John Stott, fabulous example of how being Anglican is not a thing in and of itself, but it is a thing that is meant to grab hold of the core reality of do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. There's a balance to it. There's a way of living in the world. And Stott was way ahead of his time. Long before spiritual, not religious was a thing, long before postmodern became a common word, he was simply, because of the depth of his experience of the living Jesus, he was answering those pains. He was responding to those pains before they were commonly acknowledged enough to have labels. Stott was at a church that's in city center in London, and he had a very humble way of being present in society as a follower of Jesus. Just presenting himself saying, this is who I am, but I'm not here to make you do anything or force you to believe this or try to take control of things. I'm just here. It's who I am. God's love has changed me. It's real for you too. He just had a way of being open in that space. The night I heard him speak, he visited the campus. I had read some of his books. He was really influential to me already. I had no idea what Anglican or anything was. I just recognized this is a person worth listening to. And he came to my campus to speak. And we went into this building. It was a lovely hall. It's a hall that's used by the theater company. And it's a classic kind of thing. It's very similar to the chapel in the retreat house, if you made that the way I'd like to make it, which is about 5 times bigger. Still not big, but big enough, Lovely, classic, simple hall, but beautiful. And his message and that space, the simple beauty of it, it fit together so nicely. So he was in city center London. He wasn't pushy, he wasn't imposing his faith on anyone, but he also wouldn't let it be pushed away from public reality. He wouldn't let people say, that's fine, you keep it to yourself. He's like, no, this is who I am. I'm just going to be present. Loving people is who I am. He was way ahead of his time in terms of recognizing the growth of the international church and challenging Christians in the Western countries to be involved with theological education for believers all over the world. Way ahead of his time. He was way ahead of his time in terms of his care for creation. He was a serious amateur birder, but he also was just someone who understood. Caring for creation is not a tack-on. This is a simple Christian thing. He had a book that came out after he had become famous and his reputation was well established and all that. He called it Human Rights and Human Wrongs. He was ahead of his time in naming some of these kind of things and working through them in the modern world. And then people started to say, gosh, people love John Stott the preacher, but they don't really like John Stott the prophet. That's what happens. He's saying some things that people don't want to hear. Here's the reason I'm bringing him up. He lived, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. For him, it flowed naturally, if you will, from the root. And the root was the cross of Christ. Think about what a root is. A root is the thing that gets nourishment and feeds it up and keeps the tree living so that the tree produces fruit. Stott stayed closely connected to the root. And then that fruit, sorry for the rhyme, came out. It just did. His big book, his life's work, was a book called The Cross of Christ. He says this: I could never myself believe in God if it were not for the cross. The only God I believe in is the one Nietzsche ridiculed as God on the cross. Get it? He's addressing postmodernity before it's a thing. People are only interested in power. Stott says, not for me. I want the God on the cross. In the real world of pain, how could one worship a God who was immune to it? I have entered many Buddhist temples in different countries and stood respectfully before the statue of the Buddha, his legs crossed, arms folded, eyes closed, the ghost of a smile playing round his mouth, a remote look on his face, detached from the agonies of the world. But each time, after a while, I have had to turn away. And in imagination, I have turned instead to that lonely, twisted, tortured figure on the cross, nails through hands and feet, back lacerated, limbs wrenched, brow bleeding from thorn pricks, mouth dry and intolerably thirsty, plunged in God-forsaken darkness. That is the God for me. He laid aside his immunity to pain. He entered our world of flesh and blood, tears and death. He suffered for us. Our sufferings become more manageable in the light of his. There is still a question mark against human suffering, but over it we boldly stamp another mark, the cross, that symbolizes divine suffering. The cross of Christ is God's only self-justification in such a world as ours. The other gods were strong, but God was weak. They rode, but God stumbled to a throne. To our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And a God that has not wounds is not God alone. When Micah works his way down, asking what would possibly be big enough to reset this problem, it's a foreshadowing of Jesus and the cross and the gospel. When God, not for God's own sin, but out of love, gives his own son. And that son is the only one who had perfectly walked, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. If you wanted to put in super summary, what did Jesus do? That's what he did. He treated everyone and everything as they should be treated, as fellow parts of God's great work. Not that Jesus is created, but as beings who he had gifted life to himself. Jesus walked in famous, justifiably famous compassion for people. And Jesus himself said he walked completely submitted to the will of his Father. He walked humbly with his God. You could say that what drives the minor prophets is that they notice that the people of Israel have lost connection with the root, and they've misplaced their sense of hope. But they always come back, in spite of how they hit it so hard, they always come back to moments of hope. Micah does at the end. It shall come to pass, he shall judge, God shall judge between many peoples, shall decide disputes for strong nations far away. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall sit every one under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Let's pray, friends. I invite you just to take a moment. Take a moment. Can you imagine yourself by the Spirit of God being a person who does justice? What would you look like as a person who does justice? Who loves mercy? Can the Hesed love of God for you, full, complete, always present, undeserved, can that love let you imagine being able to love with kindness and mercy to others? And can you imagine yourself walking humbly with your God? Can you believe your God wants to walk with you? And just take a moment and notice, aren't you beautiful when you imagine these things? Don't you feel relieved? Don't you feel like, oh wow, that's who I'm meant to be?